Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish, where we'll be discussing Alex Salmond, period poverty and Brexit with our guest Councillor Mhairi Hunter. Welcome. So former First Minister Alex Salmond has been accused of sexual harassment during his time in office. There have now been calls for him to be suspended from the party. Salmond has denied the allegations and has launched legal action against the government over the probe. So what are your initial thoughts on this news? Right.
It's really a very difficult situation, I think, both for the government and for the SNP as a whole. But you know, it's obviously important that when people make allegations of these sorts, that they're listened to and that the issues are properly investigated. I think, you know, clearly there's going to be a bit of a media frenzy around this, and I think some of the tone of the coverage already has just been really unhelpful. You know, I guess it's just a kind of perennial problem you get in the media around these sorts of stories, that they just kind of trivialise it and sensationalise it, and some of the language is really unhelpful. And I just wish they would think a bit more about the impact that their coverage can have, and you know, on women who perhaps are in a difficult situation, and think about, do I want to come forward? And think, well, if you're going to end up on the front page of tabloid newspapers, you know, maybe not.
Yeah, sure. And do you think that the Scottish Government has responded in a better way than, say, Westminster did after their scandal on sexual abuse?
I mean, I think, you know, there was a process put in place, and that process has been followed. It's now become a matter which has been referred to the police, and obviously it's always the case in these situations that there's a process that has to be followed, and there's very little point in speculating about it while that process is ongoing. But people always do, and you know, I kind of wish people could just moderate their language a little bit. I think when they talk about these issues, and just bear in mind that it's an extremely difficult situation, both for the people who've made the allegations and, to be fair to, you know, the person who's the subject of allegations. And this kind of really intense speculation isn't particularly helpful for anybody.
And do you think suspension right now would be the correct answer and way to go about things?
It's quite a complex situation, because there is legal action ongoing, albeit it's against the Scottish Government, but it was the Scottish Government process which led to this outcome. So it's quite a tricky kind of legal situation, I think. So I understand people saying, you know, calling for that, but for me personally, as a member of the SNP, I think it's more important that the National Secretary makes the right decision, you know, even if that takes a bit of time, rather than being pushed into doing something simply because of media headlines.
Okay, and thousands of low-paid women are proceeding with equal pay claims in Glasgow against Glasgow City Council after a court session ruling last year. Mm-hmm. So the ruling was a year ago. Why has it taken so long to get this back into public attention, do you think?
Well, I'll start off by saying that we had a commitment to settle equal pay claims, which have been ongoing for, you know, over a decade now. It's not a simple process. When we initially came into the council, we found that, you know, no work at all had been done on this. You know, literally nothing. There had been no conversations, no preparatory work, no kind of scoping of how many cases might be considered. You know, absolutely nothing had been done. So there's been an enormous amount of work done, and there have been negotiations ongoing since the beginning of the year, really. Mm-hmm. And we're fairly confident that we'll get to an outcome by December. But I think anybody who thought this was going to be a quick or easy process was really labouring under quite a misapprehension, because it's extremely complex.
Sure. And how do you think this is likely to impact services by the council?
It's going to be financially challenging. I mean, we're already doing a lot of work in terms of scoping out how we can fund this. It is going to be kind of challenging. It is going to have an impact. There's no point saying that it won't have an impact, because it will. But we think we can minimise the impact on frontline services. So we think there is a way of doing this. The kind of biggest outcome, in a sense, will be restricting our ability to find different ways of bringing finance into different areas. But we think it is manageable.
Sure. So what are the next steps going ahead from now?
Well, we are aiming for a kind of December deadline in terms of the actual settlement. There's another process going on, because the whole issue arose out of the fact that the kind of pay and grading scheme the council has been found to discriminate against women, and we completely accept that it does. So we've also made the decision and got support from other parties in the council to essentially abandon our current pay and grading scheme, because there would be no point in setting equal pay if you continue to have that discrimination built into the system. So there's a parallel process which is linked, but also separate, which is about coming up with an entirely new pay and grading scheme, which we can be confident is fair and is not going to lead to future cases being taken against us. That will take longer than the settlement, and that will take a couple of years.
Okay. And in terms of other Glasgow news, residents living close to the Garnet Hill area after the Glasgow School of Art fire have now been allowed back into their homes for the first time. But there has been some residents saying that they are likely to sue. What is your response to this?
Clearly, they have the entitlement to sue, but I'm not sure on what basis they would do that. I mean, it's been a really, really terrible situation. I completely understand that, but perhaps people don't appreciate the council has to work within legislation, and the legislation is absolutely crystal clear that it does not give the council discretion to allow people into dangerous areas at their own risk. A lot of the residents were saying, just let us in for 10 minutes, we'll sign a waiver or so on. We can't do that. Even if we wanted to, we can't, because the law is very, very clear, and it says that we must keep people out of a dangerous area, and so we didn't have any choice about that.
Right, so today's the first time they're getting to go back after 10 weeks. What led to this delay? Why did it take so long, do you think?
It was simply about stabilising and demolishing the part of the building that needed to be taken down and stabilising the rest. And I think what people maybe don't understand is that the actual work to kind of stabilise and demolish the building created as much of a risk as the condition of the building itself. It's unfortunate that it's, short story is, it's on a hill, so the kind of the risk was real. The risk was very real, and we really didn't have any choice about keeping people out until we reached the point where we could say there's no longer a risk to life.
Okay, and what support is going to be available now to residents who are moving back in? Because a lot of them are saying they have to begin from scratch again almost, because they've lost so many of their belongings.
Well, I mean, there will be immediate impacts, and one of the things we've done is try to get environmental health into people's houses before they actually go back, because there's bound to be issues. I mean, there will be issues with rodents and other issues, so we'll provide as much support as we can with that. There's also ongoing issues that people are finding with their insurance, and the council has certainly, done as much as we can to get insurance companies to pay out and explain what the situation is. But I think we might need a bit more political pressure on insurance companies, maybe coming from MPs. Maybe it's something which is reserved, so we'd like to see a bit more kind of pushing on that. Alison Thewlis has been quite vocal and has asked the Prime Minister to get involved in that. So I think a bit of political pressure on insurance companies would be good.
Okay, and it's not just residents who've been affected, obviously there's local businesses as well. What support is going to be in place for them?
Well, there's support coming through from the Scottish Government for local businesses, and clearly, kind of Sucky Hall Street. To be honest, there were issues with Sucky Hall Street before the fires, you know, and it's been pretty, you know, those have been exacerbated by the fires at either end, but there were issues before that.
What
so
were these
there
issues?
is just in terms of declining footfall and the condition of the street, issues which affect every high street really, but were affecting Sucky Hall Street particularly. So there's a longer term plan around the kind of avenues project in Glasgow to kind of deal with and improve the kind of public realm. But I think we do also need to have a really, you know, deep kind of look at what we do to support Sucky Hall Street and the city centre as a whole. So there is a working group looking at that and looking at what we can do as a council. It's not all down to the council, but what we can do as a council to kind of improve and support the city centre.
And in terms of the art school, do you think it's likely to be rebuilt soon, anytime?
I don't know. That's really for them. You know, it's not something the council has any say in really. But I think if their insurance comes through, then you know there's no reason why they shouldn't. Clearly, I think you know you need to look at some of the issues around why the fire happened, and that's not something that the council had any input into because it's a historic building. The kind of rules which normally apply to construction sites don't necessarily apply. So possibly we need to look at that. But I think we need to have a clear understanding of what happened, and what caused the fire, and what can be done to ensure that if there is reconstruction, that you know clearly that doesn't happen a third time. Because I don't think anybody could deal with it happening a third time. Twice is bad enough.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this week it has been announced that the Sunday Herald was to stop being published. Instead, there'll be a new Herald on Sunday, and independent supporting newspaper The National will now be published on a Sunday as well, edited by our former presenter Richard Walker. We take a look back at the newspaper with Pat Kane reminiscing about the beginning of it all.
So from music to media, you were one of the founding editors of the Sunday Herald.
I was, yes.
Yeah, you left in 2000, I think.
Yes, I left in 2000. I started in 1998 in the preparations for it, and I left in 2000 to go and write a book called The Play Ethic. So that was actually my first ever job. As in working in an office, dealing with budgets, dealing with office politics, you know, and I was so
Your worst nightmare.
I was so garbage at it that I had to go out and write a book from the work ethic to the play ethic. But yes, it was a great time. Some incredibly talented people. I mean, Richard Walker, who went on to edit the Sunday Herald and started the National, he was the production editor there. Andrew Jaspan, who had been involved in both the Sunday Times Scotland and then Scotland on Sunday in its early birth. And the Sunday Herald was created partly culturally, politically, and partly commercially. Commercially, because there was a Sunday paper out that was hoovering up advertising, and the then owners of the Herald thought that they should get some of that Sunday money. And culturally, politically, because it was the Parliament had just been endorsed in the referendum. And they thought that there was an appetite for a pro-Scottish intelligent thinking paper. So I remember the office space was covered in azure iMacs of the kinds. Remember the ones that looked like a kind of big sweetie,
yeah.
You know? And we were all terribly proud that we were the first office in the world at iMacs. They were useless actually, but I had to get rid of them at a certain point. But and it was just full of just when I think about the number of people that were on the editorial floor, there were scores of people on this editorial floor.
You wouldn't see that now.
You wouldn't see it now. And talented people who I know who are off doing. I mean, one person's deputy editor of the Evening Standard, who Charlotte Ross, who started out writing a fanzine called Harpies and Quines with Leslie Riddoch. You know, so if you map out all the networks that fed into the Sunday Herald and then want to go out from the Sunday Herald, it's quite extraordinary actually, and it's still going and thriving, and I remember actually a discussion around the table with lots of the early editorial staff about whether the paper should support independence, and this would be in 1998.
Wow.
And I'm not going to name names of people who have changed their position somewhat, but it was a good discussion, and I think the discussion was be open-minded. At that time, it was be open-minded and editorially run as if all the options are credible. So what the Sunday Herald did in terms of committing to a particular political position in the run-up to the referendum, the seeds of that were always there, because they sort of felt as if it would be disrespecting the audience. You know, if you didn't bring in or programme in voices that supported independence or had a strong vision for more powers. And I think so. That's why the subsequent development that's on there is programmed in from the beginning, in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Students across Scotland will have free access to sanitary products thanks to a new £5.2 million fund introduced by the Scottish Government, the first in the world to introduce this in schools, colleges and universities. The scheme, which coincides with the beginning of the academic year, is aimed at tackling period poverty and will help 395,000 school pupils and students. So what are your initial thoughts on this? It is a positive step, but how is it going to affect people who aren't students who are affected by period poverty?
There are various ways in which people can pick up free kind of sanitary products. I think doing it through educational institutions is a kind of obvious way of doing it, because so many girls and women go to them. So I think that's a really good step. And it's something we've been working on in the council for some time. You know, we've already started doing this work. So it's good, frankly, to get funding coming from central government to support it. But it's not the only way in which girls and women can pick up free kind of sanitary products. There are a variety of ways. There are lots of kind of community centres now and kind of community hubs which just have packets, baskets of stuff put in the loo so people can pick them up. I think sometimes I think it's important to do it in a way that you're not kind of saying to somebody you need to go and ask for this. Do it in a way where they can just pick it up, and they don't even necessarily need to kind of talk about it. Just go in and help themselves, because for some people it still is a bit embarrassing to say I need help with this. So I think it's about making sure that girls and women have access to these products, but they don't necessarily need to actually have to go and ask someone and say, I can't afford this, because sometimes they don't want to do that.
Right. And do you think that's due to a social stigma? How would we try and reduce that? How do we get people to talk about periods more openly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole social stigma about periods anyway, although I was actually having a conversation about this not so long ago. I don't think for me personally it's something I've ever particularly felt embarrassed about talking about it, but there clearly is a lot of embarrassment around there. And I think, women will maybe talk to each other about periods, but not necessarily when there are men in the room, which I think we need to talk about periods. And equally, I'm at the stage of life where it's the menopause that keeps me awake at night. I talk about that all the time. I don't care if people want to hear it or not. If I get a hot flush, I'm telling you why. And I think we need to just, I think we absolutely need to be completely open about it. And being completely open about that means, if folk have an idea that all you need for a period is just a packet of tampons, it very much depends on what kind of period you're having. You might be having a really heavy period. You might be having a very variable period. Quite often I got a really heavy 3 days and then hardly anything, but it went on for about another 4 or 5 days. So, and it varies month to month. And I think also, I was hearing from someone the other day who was saying that guys in their office said to them, I want you to give me a calendar of your periods so I know when you're going to be in a bad mood. And you think, well, who can actually come up with a calendar? Because it's just not that kind of precise. So I think there are a lot of myths and misunderstandings about periods out there among men. And so the more we kind of talk about them, the more maybe they will understand it's not exactly, this kind of, just simple thing that at an exact time of the month you bleed in exactly the same way. They need to understand it's that, your periods are kind of a roller coaster, I think, and then when you get to the end of that roller coaster, you start the whole new roller coaster of the menopause.
All right, and in terms of community centres providing their own sort of sanitary products, is there going to be funding potentially in the future that can help with that? Because they're doing it out of their own pockets at the moment.
Yeah. Potentially, this is, as I say, just in terms of scale, doing it through kind of schools and colleges gives you a big kind of scale to make sure that you are getting stuff out to people, but it's definitely not the only way of doing it, and there are many other options we're looking at.
A lot of the time this impacts people from disadvantaged backgrounds and poorer economic backgrounds. They tend not to have as much visibility in universities and colleges and schools, etc. So how do we make sure that they're not being affected by period poverty?
Exactly the way I was talking about earlier, making sure that there are public places and public spaces where people can just go in, even if it's as simple as just putting a basket with stuff in the toilet that people can just take away with them.
Sure. Okay. And there's also been a lot of Brexit news recently. So Scotland is facing a no-deal Brexit nightmare, according to Constitutional Relations Secretary Michael Russell. And the comment comes after the UK government has published the first batch of technical notices. So what are your initial reactions to this? What did you think?
I still kind of... There's part of me that at the back of my mind still thinks this is all going to work out somehow. But we're getting to the point of thinking, well, maybe it's not. It's difficult to really accept that, the kind of UK government is going to let this happen. But you're increasingly beginning to think perhaps they are, because perhaps they just simply don't know how to stop it. I think Theresa May has been trying all of her time as Prime Minister to kind of try and find a way to reconcile both sides of the Conservative Party. And she's been focusing on that to the exclusion of actually trying to resolve the issue with Brexit. And I understand why, because for her, that's what she needs to try and do as leader of the Conservative Party. But as Prime Minister, you need to be trying to get Britain into a position where there is a Brexit deal on the table which is achievable and which is not going to completely tank the economy and destroy thousands of jobs. And she's utterly failed to do that. And we are in a situation where potentially it is going to be that cliff edge scenario, which would be disastrous. And really, in terms of who can save us from that, it's the EU. I don't think the EU has an interest in seeing Britain fall off the edge of the cliff. So we just have to hope that somehow they're going to be able to, to help resolve this. If the UK government isn't able to do that, I think the more people become aware of the implications of a no-deal Brexit, the more panic there will be. I've heard people saying, it's not going to be as bad as it's said. Well, even if it's half as bad as it's predicted, it's going to be bad. So we really have to do everything we can to avoid getting into this position.
And what would some of these consequences be that you're mentioning? What would some examples be? What industries would be affected?
Well, I think even something as basic as food, you have these really complex kind of chains of supply, but which tend to kind of operate without much leeway in the system. So we simply don't have the capacity to store vast amounts of food. We just don't have that. We just don't have that capacity, and you can't create that capacity overnight. And there's no work being done to create that capacity. And then you get into the issue around medicines, which frankly, I just think is quite extraordinary, because you can't even get into a position where you say we might have to start stockpiling medicines, because you need to procure medicines. There's a whole process there which, as far as I know, no one's starting to look at a kind of specific procurement strategy to deal with this. So, it's why I kind of think at the back of my head, this isn't actually going to happen. This isn't actually going to happen because we're not prepared for it. So,
do you think it might then be a sort of project fear thing that's come up?
It's really difficult to tell. Do you know what? At this point in time, I honestly don't know what's going on, and what I really worry about is that I think possibly Theresa May really doesn't know what's going on. I think we're in a very, very unpredictable situation, the most politically unpredictable situation I can ever remember, and we have an increasingly short space of time to try and get on top of it.
Right, sure. So do you think an independence referendum would potentially lead to this being solved or help minimise impacts?
Yes, I think I think the kind of difficulty with setting a timescale for a referendum is that we are in this position which is just completely chaotic, and we don't yet have any kind of real sense of what the Brexit deal could entail, and we don't even know when we're going to get any real sense of what the Brexit deal will entail. And I think it's difficult to start to set a timetable around a referendum, far less get a Section 30 order, which you need to get for it to happen while we're still in this position of political chaos. But I think quite clearly you need to look at what's going on now, and look back to what was said in 2014, and the irony is absolutely enormous. Everything which was predicted to happen if independence took place is now happening, even more so because we voted no, essentially. But I think there's a big focus on timescales, which I just think it's almost impossible to put a timescale on when an independence referendum would happen, because we simply don't know when and if and how Brexit is going to happen. We just don't have that kind of level of clarity, and I think you need that level of clarity before you set out a process to get to the next independence referendum.
And analysis by the UK and Scottish governments has revealed that a hard Brexit could hit Scottish GDP by up to 9%, costing Scotland £12.7 billion a year. So what do you think about this? How are we meant to limit the impact once again?
I think it will be difficult to limit the impact, and I also think the impact of losing free movement will just, if that happens, it will just mean that we lose a big chunk of our economy, and that has a knock-on effects in public services. But losing freedom of movement also means that it will be extremely difficult to get back out of that situation, because essentially economic growth is driven by population growth, and without freedom of movement, it's difficult to have that level of population growth. It's difficult to try and attract people to come. I think what would happen with a hard Brexit is that, frankly, London and the South East will still be okay, because they're the engine of the UK economy. The peripheral areas and North and West England would just be in a really, really bad situation, and because you were turning off the tap in terms of free movement, it would become increasingly difficult to attract people to come and live and work, so you just end up in a downward spiral. It's just a situation we do not want to get into.
Sure. And do you think access to the EU single market would be one of the answers?
Yes, I mean, for the UK, absolutely. I mean, if the UK just said, okay, we want to leave the EU, but we want to remain in the single market, that would absolutely be an answer, which would work for everyone, I think. It wouldn't just work for England, it would work for Scotland, it would work for Northern Ireland as well. Because we haven't talked about the Northern Ireland situation yet, but that's also an extremely difficult one. And when you hear people like, Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, oh, we'll just have checks on the border, you just think, come on.
Sure. Right. And you mentioned that migration is going down. A lot of these industries, so things like hospitality, healthcare, they all depend on migrants to keep functioning. How are we going to attract people to Scotland, and how are we going to retain people in Scotland as well?
Yeah. With difficulty. I mean, we're already seeing fruit rotting in the fields, and a lot of people say, well, we have people who are unemployed and they can go and pick the fruit. But it's about matching the kind of needs of the economy with the skills and the aptitudes of the people who are actually available to go and work. Because picking fruit is something for young people to do. It's not necessarily going to be a lifetime's career. It's something that they're going to do because they're young and they're fit. They make a bit of money. They have, it enables them to live in a different country for a while, practice their English, have some free time to travel around Scotland. But, if we're saying then to people, maybe someone who's 40 and doesn't have the best of health and, is looking for a job and say, well, go and pick fruit, that's just a piece of nonsense. That's a completely inappropriate job for them to do. So I think there's this kind of level of misunderstanding of people saying, look, if you look at the statistics, there are people who are unemployed. That doesn't mean they can go and start picking fruit. It doesn't mean they can go and start working long hours in a hotel. They need the kind of work which is suitable for them. And we need to have the kind of flexibility which allows us to attract people who are mainly going to be young people, who want to go and do that kind of work for a couple of years, which gives them the opportunity to live in a different country. And it's a very different thing to saying this is going to be your career, this is going to be your job, and you're going to have to get by on this.
Sure. And in terms of people migrating outwards out of Scotland, how is this going to affect opportunities for young people here? And the Erasmus scheme and Horizon 2020, what effects would that have?
It will just cut them off. I mean, it'll just cut them off. I was actually I was probably one of the first waves of people who used freedom of movement. And this is quite a while ago, I think, not long after it was first introduced, I went and worked in Brussels for a year and a half, and it was just such a simple process. You just simply go, I moved to Brussels and work there. There's no application, there's nothing, you just go and work there. That's how it works. And countless young people from Scotland have gone to Brussels and other parts of Europe and just worked there for as long as they wanted to work there. They've had that opportunity to go and live in a different country, a different culture, develop skills there which will benefit them when they come home, and really cutting that chance off, that opportunity off for young people is really a terrible thing to do. It's a really terrible thing to do.
Right, and what else do you think needs to be done in terms of clearing up this Brexit mess?
I don't know is the short answer to that, because obviously from a Scottish perspective we voted Remain, and that wouldn't change. It's about the political kind of churn in England, and how they find a way to reverse Brexit. There's a whole people's vote movement which I'm just a little bit kind of sceptical about, because having a vote on a Brexit deal is not actually, where does that take you? Even if people vote not to accept the Brexit deal, where does that take them? Does it mean that they have to negotiate a different deal? Does it mean that Brexit is off? It's not really clear. I mean, my view, what I would like to see is I would like to see the government just be honest and saying, look, we can't do this. We can't do this without destroying a large part of our economy. We understand you voted for this, but actually it can't be done. That won't happen.
Right.
I would like it to happen. It won't happen. I think MPs could be a lot more proactive, and obviously there's a whole position of Corbyn and Labour who are trying to play it both ways on Brexit. They're trying to appeal both to Leavers and Remainers, and that's just, not only is it politically stupid, it's to me it's a complete dereliction of duty. He should be arguing against Brexit, which might help to change the political situation in England, but I don't know if it would. But we are essentially just watching what's happening in England and piping up now and then and making our point of view. But it's going to be decided in England, and Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales will just have to lump it. That's the way it works.
Okay. And the SNP are currently challenging Jeremy Corbyn to get behind efforts to keep Scotland and the UK in the single market, but saying Labour is betraying working people. Do you think that this would end up pushing more Scottish people into poverty in the end of it all?
As I said, I think Labour's trying to play it both ways. I mean, they're playing a game where they use the language of, wanting to remain within the single market that's targeted towards Remainers, but they're also still using the language of wanting to leave the single market and end free movement, and that's targeted towards the people who voted leave. So they're trying to appeal to both sides, and they're ending up just appealing to no one, because what they say changes week to week, and they are weak. They are profoundly weak on this issue. There's just a shocking lack of leadership, and frankly, there's absolutely no chance of Jeremy Corbyn winning an election. So at some point, Labour are going to split. So we're just in a situation, I think, in politics down south where it's, as I said earlier, just in a completely unpredictable situation. I could not possibly guess where we're going to be in a year's time. Just don't know, and I don't think anybody else could.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We do appreciate you coming into the studio, and thank you very much for watching. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, you can sign up to become one of our supporters for £5 a month on our website, www.broadcastingschotland.scot. This will help us continue to make our programmes. We'll be back next week, and Scotland on 7 will be on throughout the week as well. Please do catch us then. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a good week. Bye-bye.